2021 was easily one of the years for video games, so without further ado, here are my top 10. There were a slew of indie games to release this year that I don't see myself replaying or vividly remembering, but nevertheless were well made. At the top of this mound for me would have to be the Artful Escape. Seeing as it's published by Annapurna Interactive, the unique art direction, witty writing, and talented voice acting should serve as no surprise. It also manages to tell a highly compelling story, albeit one that isn't as poignant as I hoped it would be, but it also never feels uninspired or underwhelming. Of course, the Artful Escape's major flaw is its actual gameplay. Aside from its introduction and some key areas for exploration after that, this game is practically a 4-hour-long set piece. There's nothing particularly wrong with that, seeing as it tries to emphasize the story over everything, but the lack of captivating gameplay elements and consistent innovation in its gameplay prevent me from placing the Artful Escape any higher on this list, but it's still definitely worth checking out. Unlike many games on this list, new Pokemon Snap did not exceed my expectations, and it didn't fall just short of meeting them, because there was literally no way for the developers to make this into some genre-defining masterpiece or mess it up. Aside from it being streamlined to a degree, this is a pretty apt follow-up to the casual Pokemon photography game from 1999. Although the $60 price point is a bit steep, especially given the lack of content, even with the post-launch free DLC, there's no way this can be considered a soulless cash grab. With graphics and video games being as good as they are right now, and the Switch being a perfect console for this type of game, given its vast audience and core gimmick, 2021 was the perfect time for new Pokemon Snap, and it's exactly what you'd hope it would be. Guilty Gear Strive is the only game on this list I didn't review, but it's too good not to include. Even on the surface level, this game is fantastic. The soundtrack is insanely good, and the art style, while not the most unique, is the perfect balance between gorgeous and clear enough to suit the highly intense and deep gameplay. As far as its roster goes, there are only 15 characters, not including the post-launch DLC ones, and yet there's enough depth and diversity in the roster to make that more than enough. The only thing preventing me from putting this higher on the list is probably my own skill. While it is true that this combo-intensive fighting game does a good job of being both accessible to newcomers and deep enough for long-timers to really enjoy, I imagine the more I play Strive and get better at understanding its inner workings, the more I'll appreciate it. I'm pretty cowardly when it comes to horror in video games. Hell, I'm scared of the deep woods in Mario Odyssey. However, I was able to brave through Little Nightmares 2 because it's so compelling in nearly every aspect. Its set piece of a world is entirely gloomy, but still diverse in each of its 5 areas. The story makes a fool of any game that's bogged down with hours of dialogue just to deliver some half-assed message, by being short with no words whatsoever and still conveying meaningful ideas. Sure, it's something the game Inside did, even before the first Little Nightmares, but I genuinely do think Little Nightmares 2 does a better job at conveying themes of control and conformity than Inside. Of course, it's definitely worse than Inside when it comes to gameplay, especially in the last half hour or so, but seeing how well that simplistic gameplay is used to convey a meaningful narrative, I can forgive it. Honestly shocked this one wasn't nominated for any game awards, but I definitely recommend checking it out. Every year, we see a handful of open-world games that range from utter garbage to mediocre to pretty damn good. Riders Republic is, for the most part, pretty damn good. In my opinion, the two major factors of a fantastic open-world game are variety/deliberacy and agency/versatility. Many games mess both up by being flooded with monotonous side missions and uninspired landmarks, while also constantly restricting the player from being able to interact with the game in their own unique way. Riders Republic does a pretty solid job of getting both factors right. As far as content goes, this is just an extreme sports game on a larger scale. Scattered throughout its huge and luscious world are competitions centered around gliding through the air, skiing and snowboarding, and biking. These competitions are successful at providing room for highly competitive play, and also dumb fun. And regardless, all the sports used in competitions are also just methods of transportation, so you can have fun with this game even if you're only interacting with half of its core gameplay loop. While it does restrict player agency a tiny bit by forcing you to go through every checkpoint in competitions, it never gets all that frustrating because there are so many ways to excel within a race that you don't need to skip checkpoints, which are also sometimes placed less liberally than others. Overall, Riders Republic isn't a masterpiece, but it's probably one of the best games Ubisoft has put out in recent years. Deathloop is probably the only game on this list I'm really going to have to defend. Although it received numerous perfect scores, strong arguments for why this game is underwhelming can be made. I guess the most basic one is its bad artificial intelligence. Yes, it makes this game a bit easy, however, I think it also provides the player with a wide range of options in terms of how they want to go about completing it. You have all these cool guns and abilities, which help with both power and stealth, that allow you to experiment with the gameplay loop even further, even once you beat the game. I think the most understandably controversial element of this game is its actual execution. In my most popular review this year for the game Backbone, which by the way, thank you for all the support on, I mentioned how detective games are often flawed because they tend to fail at making the player feel like a detective. Deathloop definitely has this problem, because in spite of its exciting time loop premise, where you have to replay levels at different times of day to kill 8 targets in the same day, there is only one route to doing so, which makes the game feel really restrictive in some ways. However, I think it does provide enough agency to the player in terms of how they beat each level and tackle the actual gunplay to make up for this. I don't think of this game as highly as I did when I reviewed it, but I'm not gonna act like I didn't immensely enjoy it. By far, Halo Infinite was my most anticipated game of 2021, and while it's not exactly everything I was hoping for, I'm still extremely satisfied. Sure, it may have a so-so story, a disgusting lack of biodiversity, and Assassin's Creed tier open world content, but given how experimental the concept is, it's surprising just how much 343 Industries got right. I can't really defend the very blandly designed world, however the subpar story is barely an issue considering 343's decision to seriously tone it down and make it a bit more accessible. The mediocre content throughout the world also really isn't that big of a deal, as I see this as a regular Halo game layered on top of an open world rather than vice versa, so the core gunplay loop is strong enough to override any external mediocrity. Going back to my point about how agency and versatility are important factors of a good open world game, I never felt restricted within my playthrough, both because the versatility of the Halo gameplay loop has always suited an open world structure, and because the grappling hook gives you numerous options in every situation both when it comes to movement and defeating enemies. In my review, I never actually talked about the multiplayer, which is perhaps even better. Although Forge mode won't be available till sometime in 2022, you do have every playlist you could ask for, and combined with the new guns and equipment from Halo Infinite, and the fact that Sprint has been adjusted to a perfect degree, even with the short roster of maps, I don't see myself getting bored of the multiplayer anytime soon. Before release, I was extremely worried about Psychonauts 2. Of course, I knew it would be a good game, but I was worried that it would emphasize tight platforming and combat over creative storytelling and level design, in contrast to its predecessor. Luckily, this is not the case. Admittedly, its story, mainly on an episodic front, is not as clever as the first game. You don't have the ingenious level design that conveys mental health creatively through symbolism. However, there's still great writing and character building, alongside a handful of fun ideas that work really well because each level takes place inside the mind of a character. On top of that, the actual combat and platforming is a lot more satisfying. It may not be the most innovative game of 2021, but it's refreshing for being so remarkably consistent, and while I still think the 2005 game is superior, it wouldn't be that outlandish to say Psychonauts 2 is the better title overall. Sable might be the most underrated game I have ever played, or perhaps I just think too highly of it, but that is for good reason. It almost feels like it was made for me. Recently, I've been playing Horizon Zero Dawn, which is a fun game, however, its open world feels wasted because of how little content there really is, and an overwhelming sense of linearity and restrictiveness. Sable may not have the most open world content, but it's also much smaller in scope than most AAA open world games, so it never feels underwhelming. Although its lack of mechanics and ideas means that the player isn't given that much to work with to feel that sense of agency, there are no restrictions, at least none that aren't tangible and make sense within the context of the actual game. The world just feels very unadulterated, which makes it rather simplistic gameplay enjoyable enough. The other thing I love about this game is its story. We definitely don't see enough games that center around the process of growing up, and this game tells a coming-of-age story perfectly by juxtaposing the internal journey and the external journey that the titular character goes on. Although this game is unfortunately buggy and also objectively lacking in some areas gameplay-wise, I really cannot recommend it enough. It Takes Two absolutely deserves Game of the Year. Not only is it a fun and consistent platformer with tons of unique ideas, but it's a great co-op game. That's what makes it so admirable. Those types of games aren't super marketable, but this design choice completely paid off. It's almost like this game can be analyzed from a psychological standpoint. It understands how players interact with each other and creates these opportunities where they will play both competitively and cooperatively. The best part is the Friends Pass, which allows someone to buy the game, provide a code to their co-op buddy, and only one person has to pay for it. If you know anyone who might be even remotely interested in playing this with you, please ask them to play it with you. You will not regret it. And that's it. Now, I know there are some controversial picks here, or more so it's controversial that I left out Kena Bridge of Spirits and Metroid Dread, but this is my list. Although I did play those games and didn't find them to be as impressive as some might have, there's also a handful of other games from 2021 that I just didn't get around to playing. Anyway, my next review will probably be for Pokemon Legends Arceus sometime in early February. Subscribe if that kind of content interests you. I also plan on doing some video essays or something like that this year, so yeah, thank you for watching.